Hi folks, this is Rod from Mill Creek Saw Shop, and we're going to talk about the two latest and greatest high-tech chainsaws available from Husqvarna and Stihl. It's the Stihl 362 and the Husqvarna 562xp. Both of these saws are very comparable in weight, price, in power, in fuel capacity, oil capacity, and those types of things. Although the factory specs are a little different than the actual specs when we weighed them. The factory spec on the Stihl was 12.8, and when we put it on the scale, it weighed closer to 13 pounds. And the factory spec on the 562 was 12.6, and on the scale, it was a little over 13 pounds. So you can see both manufacturers try to shave the specs a little bit as far as weight goes. Power on both chainsaws is rated at a little over 4.5 horsepower. The Stihl is rated at 4.69. This is rated at 4.7, which in the real world is almost exactly the same. What we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about what each saw has to offer, and then talk about the service problems that we've had with both of these saws, because nothing's perfect. Both of the saws have the new flip-up caps. Stihl has this flip-up cap. They've had it out for quite some time. You flip it up, twist it off, and off it comes. Husqvarna's cap pretty much works the same. It's got the same type of device. You flip it up, twist it off. Now there's threads out where Stihl's is like a bayonet. And on it goes. Conventional starter on the 562. The 362 has an elastic start, which means the rope is attached to a piece of rubber, and there's a piece of rubber in the starter handle that'll give if the saw happens to kick back on you. Both of these are high compression saws, so if you don't have a good quick snap on the starter, they can kick back. Now both of them also offer compression release, and you'll see it's at a 45-degree angle to the cylinder head, which keeps it clean, doesn't get clogged, doesn't get nasty. That's the Husqvarna, that's the Stihl. The controls in the back for starting the saws are pretty much the same. Stihl's conventional system is you squeeze and you push down, locks the throttle and so forth. Husqvarna's goes the other way. Both saws now incorporate a momentary cutoff, so when you bump the switch, it turns the saw off and then it comes back to the standard run position. And Stihl has the same thing. When you turn the saw off, it'll come back to the run position. Both of the saws have inertia chain brakes, meaning that you can either, if the handle hits your wrist, it'll lock the brake, or if the saw kicks back, it'll also set the brake. Now, here's where the saws have a little bit of a difference, and that's in the chain brake systems. On the side covers now of both of these saws, you'll notice that the bar nuts are captivated, so they don't lose. You can't lose them. They're not loose on the saw. But you'll see the inboard sprocket on the Stihl and the internal chain brake on the Stihl. Now the Husqvarna is a little different. The Husqvarna side cover, when you pull this off, your bar nuts are captivated like the Stihl, but your chain brake is in the side cover of your 562. And the reason Husqvarna does that is Husqvarna uses an outboard sprocket and clutch mechanism, not inboard. Now the thinking on this and the theory on this is that there's a lot of heat generated out here. They want the heat away from the main bearings of the motor. We've never seen any damage on a Stihl because of that, so this is just a fundamental difference between the two saws. On a Husqvarna saw, if you buy one of these online, when you go to put it together and you remove that side cover, these are packing. This is trash. That's nothing needed for the chainsaw. So if you buy one of these online and you're putting it together, make sure you pull those little plastic things off before you put the chainsaw back together. I'm going to leave these side covers off these chainsaws while we talk about some other differences. To keep the weight down on these chainsaws, Stihl has gone to a plastic loop handle. Husqvarna still runs the aluminum loop handle. We've seen pros and cons on both of these. The aluminum will tend to bend, where the plastic will tend to break in the cold weather. Both have a little bit of give. The aluminum is probably a little more reliable than the plastic overall, but again, we don't see a whole lot of service problems out of that. You'll notice the angles of the handles are a little bit different. You know, it pays if you're going to spend $750 on a chainsaw to pick these up and feel the weights and balance, because that loop handle is going to make the chainsaw feel different. So to gain access into the top of these saws, Stihl uses what's called Zeus screws. There's 3 of them. You push down, you turn, it unlocks them. You have to put the chain brake in the engaged position, and then the top cover will come off, giving you access to the chainsaw, air filter, control system, and everything. You'll see some wires, a little more wires than probably what you're used to. That's for Stihl's m-tronic system, is what they call their fuel injection. That's what they call their fuel injection, is m-tronic. These fuel injected saws, the systems on them are pretty nice. They will compensate for barometric pressure and things like that, but you got to keep in mind it's still a chainsaw. It still needs to be cleaned off, it needs to be blown out, your fuel needs to be fresh, and you need to have a sharp chain. Any one of those those 3 things that gets out of whack will cause problems with the chainsaw. We do have all the diagnostic equipment here to plug these in and work on them. We'll talk about specific service problems related to each saw here in a minute. Husqvarna system, a little bit easier. The top just pops off. You can use a handy dandy scrunch. You have the same 3 locking mechanisms, but again, they're a little easier to get off. Pull the chain brake down, off cover your top cover. You can see everything right here with the saw. Air filter, of course, you're going to see some wires running around, that type of thing. Now, Husqvarna does use a primer on their saws for ease of starting. For the pro guys, this is probably not that big of a concern, but for a homeowner that lets his saw sit a little bit, this is nice. You know, you can circulate the fuel, get the fresh out of the tank, up into the carb, out of the carb, back into the tank. Again, this is a computer-operated saw too. They don't use the buzzword m-tronic, they use auto-tune. Basically the same type of thing, compensates for barometric pressure and things like that, keeps the saw running at the optimum air-to-fuel ratio. Now, we'll talk about service problems with these 2 saws. Fundamentally, if you look at the cylinder design, this is designed at a 45, this is designed at a 90. Husqvarna claims that a saw is really running its best when it's in a horizontal plane. However, to cool a saw in a horizontal plane is tough, so they split the difference, made it at a 45. Stihl still uses the 90. Stihl uses 2 piston rings. Husqvarna uses 1 piston ring. Now we see some problems here. We do get a few more of these burned up than we do these. And I'm burned up, I mean overheated from whatever the cause may be, dull chain, clogged air system, poor fuel, that type of thing. The single ring design will stick the ring in the piston a little bit easier than the 2 rings. The 2 rings tend to dissipate the heat a little better, and you don't have those service problems like you do out of the 562. Now, if both of these chainsaws were taken care of and both of these chainsaws were looked after like they're supposed to, meaning fresh gas, blown out, and sharp chain, both of them would live long, happy lives. But if you abuse them, it appears from what we see in our shop that the 362 will handle a little bit more abuse on the engine than the 562 will. But that's where it stops. Stihl's computer system and the pintle that fires the fuel needle in the carburetor definitely is more sensitive to fuel than the 562s. We've sold probably 50 times more 562s than 362s, and these are in the shop a lot for fuel pintle problems. We don't know why. Stihl at this point really doesn't know why. They've been warrantying them, but that's an issue. We don't see that at all on this saw. The other thing we see a little bit more on the Stihl that we don't see on the Husqvarna is we see some vibration issues in the linkage that works the throttle control of the machine. Now, both of these saws utilize spring mounts for vibration, but for some reason we don't see the throttle control issues on the 562s that we do on the 362 Stihl. And it might be that Husqvarna utilizes a throttle cable. You can kind of see the cable in here working the controls. And maybe that's the difference between the vibration on this saw versus this saw and the damage that's done. So $750, either saw, 20-inch bar and chain, 3/8, 50 gauge, Both good units, both the top of the line as far as technology, performance, and weight goes. A little more nuisance problems over here that seem to bring the saw down. This saw, if it's abused more, we have problems. But overall, both good running saws, lots of power, in a small package. Great firewood saw, great timber saw, great farm saw. Remember that you can always check out millcreeksawshop.com. Call us on our 800 number, 1-800-488-0465. We'll be happy to give you the best deal we can on these two saws. Sometimes we can ship them, sometimes we can't ship them, just depends. But you can always go to the website or, like I said, give us a call. Thank you for watching our video.